Open Netflix for just a few seconds, and you're immediately flooded with options. Rows of thumbnails, endless categories, new releases competing for your attention. Everything is labeled as a must-watch, as if you're always one choice away from missing out. And yet, despite all of it, you keep scrolling and scrolling, unsure of what to press. And somehow, despite all those choices, you don't pick anything new. You close the menus, you stop scrolling, and you press play on the same show you've already seen before, the same movie, the same characters you already know by heart. You know every line. You know how it ends. You've seen it 10 times, maybe 20. And sooner or later, someone asks you the question, why don't you watch something new? But that question misses the point. Because the real mystery isn't why you rewatch. It's why, in a world obsessed with novelty, familiarity feels so powerful. Some people constantly chase new content. Others ignore the algorithm completely and press play on the same screen again. And no, this isn't about being boring, lazy, or stuck in the past. What's happening here runs much deeper than taste. Psychology shows that rewatching is often a signal, a quiet message about what your mind needs right now. And once you understand that, the habit starts to make a lot more sense. Before we talk about the different types of rewatchers, we need to pause and understand one thing. Your brain does not experience new and familiar the same way. New content demands attention. It asks your brain to evaluate, predict, and stay alert. Who is this character? What's their role? Is this safe? Is this interesting? Is this worth my time? Familiar content does the opposite. The moment your brain recognizes a scene, something shifts. Your nervous system relaxes. There are no surprises to prepare for, no uncertainty to manage. Psychologists have long known that predictability creates a sense of control, and control is one of the fastest ways to reduce stress. When life feels uncertain, fast, or overwhelming, the mind instinctively looks for environments it already understands, places where nothing bad is waiting around the corner. A familiar show becomes one of those places, not because it's exciting, but because it's safe. So rewatching isn't really about entertainment. It's about regulation. It's the mind quietly choosing stability over stimulation. And from that foundation, the different rewatcher types begin to emerge. The first type is what psychologists often describe as the comfort seeker. For these people, life doesn't feel calm or predictable. Their days are filled with pressure, work, stress, relationship tension, financial worries, or the constant feeling that everything is changing too fast. When the outside world feels unstable, the mind starts craving something steady. That's where rewatching comes in. A familiar show offers certainty. You already know how the episode ends. You know the character will be okay. You know the conflict will resolve. And that certainty matters more than the story itself. Psychologically, this is tied to something called predictability bias. When stress levels rise, the brain actively looks for environments it can control. A familiar show becomes an emotional shelter, like returning to the same place when you're overwhelmed. Nothing unexpected can happen there. So when a comfort seeker presses play, they're not avoiding reality. They're regulating their nervous system. It's the same reason people revisit the same cafe, the same walking route, the same routines. Familiarity creates safety. For them, rewatching isn't entertainment. It's emotional grounding. The second type isn't seeking emotional comfort. They're seeking mental rest. These are people whose days are spent thinking, making decisions, solving problems, processing information nonstop. By the time the day ends, their brain is exhausted, and this is where new content becomes a burden. A new show asks a lot from the mind. You have to learn new characters, track new storylines, understand new rules of a fictional world. That requires energy they don't have left. Rewatching removes that demand. The brain doesn't need to analyze or predict. It doesn't need to pay close attention. It already knows what's coming. Psychologists refer to this as cognitive load reduction. The brain, like a battery, can only handle so much before it needs recovery. Familiar shows allow the mind to stay occupied without being taxed. They become mental white noise, something to rest inside rather than work through. For the cognitive rest seeker, rewatching isn't passive, it's strategic. The third type doesn't return to a show for comfort or rest. They return for connection. For them, a familiar show isn't just entertainment, it's a memory container. Maybe they watched it during a specific period of their life, a time when things felt simpler, a time before loss, before responsibility, before things changed. Psychologists sometimes describe this as emotional time travel. The show becomes a doorway, not into the story, but into the person they were when they first watched it. Every rewatch reconnects them to that version of themselves. That's why the emotions still hit, even after 10 rewatches, even when they know every line. They're not reacting to the scene, they're reacting to the memory tied to it. Letting go of the show would mean letting go of that emotional anchor, of a version of life that no longer exists. So they return again and again, not because they forgot what happened, but because they don't want to forget what it felt like. For the nostalgic anchor, rewatching is how identity stays continuous in a world that keeps moving forward. The fourth type rewatches for a completely different reason. They're not seeking comfort. They're not resting. They're not chasing nostalgia. They're curious. For these people, a show is layered. Nothing feels accidental. Every line, every pause, every background detail might mean something. The first viewing is only an introduction. The real story reveals itself later. They rewatch to catch what they missed. Foreshadowing hidden in plain sight. Subtle expressions. Quiet moments that change meaning once you know the ending. Psychologists often link this behavior to high openness and analytical thinking. Their minds naturally search for patterns, connections, and depth. So rewatching doesn't feel repetitive to them. It feels exploratory. Each viewing sharpens the picture. The world of the show becomes richer, more complete. For the detail hunter, a show isn't just something you consume. It's a system you study, a world you walk through slowly, corner by corner. And that's why watching once is never enough. At first glance, these four types look very different. One seeks safety. One needs rest. One holds on to memory. One searches for depth. But underneath, they all share something important. They're not avoiding growth. They're responding to what their mind needs. Yet we live in a culture that constantly glorifies novelty. New shows, new trends, new experiences. As if choosing something familiar means you're stuck. But psychology tells a different story. Growth doesn't always come from more stimulation. Sometimes it comes from understanding yourself well enough to choose what stabilizes you. In a world that never slows down, familiarity becomes a quiet form of intelligence. These people aren't behind. They're tuned inward. The comfort seeker protects their peace. The cognitive rest seeker preserves their energy. The nostalgic anchor stays connected to their story. The detail hunter deepens their understanding. None of these are flaws. They're strategies. So if you keep rewatching the same show or movie, maybe you're not stuck. Maybe you've simply figured out what works for you. So which one are you? Leave a comment and tell us your type and the show or movie you always come back to. If this made you see yourself a little differently, hit subscribe.